for us, and Mark mentioned before about the timescales, it's a year, but that's not a long time, I suppose. And it's safe to say that HMRC would prefer every single worker in the UK to be paid pay-as-you-earn. That's their aim. It's called off-payroll working. So ultimately, that's what they want. We think, on our experience, that in some cases that is correct. There are people working through limited companies and PSCs that shouldn't be. But our experience does show and demonstrates that that's definitely not the case for everyone. There are many qualified, skilled and professional freelancers that are relied upon by organisations for their flexibility, and they do need to be supported. To ensure that they can be supported, it is imperative that we start preparing for these changes as soon as possible. And again, just to point on that, from our work that we've done with some clients so far, this is where Mawson can help you out as well, because you really need to start to understand quickly your populations, how people are getting paid. It's never been an issue for you before, as Mark pointed out, but you now need to understand who's working through a PSC, because this legislation is only relevant to those people. And we have outlined in the pack there that there's a process checklist which has outlined some further considerations for you. So if you've not already done that, I'd advise have a quick look at that and then start getting your thoughts together, I suppose. We would also suggest that you consider your initial communications to ensure that all stakers have an awareness of these changes and when they're coming in. I was speaking to Bobby earlier, and there was a Mawson event on Tuesday, wasn't there, where the contractors were asking, what are you doing about IR35? And Bobby was able to say, well, actually, we've got a seminar on Friday, we've got a seminar on Tuesday, and they were happy with that, because all they want to know is that it's on your radar, it's something that you're thinking about, and it's not going to be something that they're just going to get pushed onto, basically. The way that you communicate with your contractors is going to be very, very key. Okay, but there's commercial sensitivities around when you do that into different populations, obviously. Just on the last point there, with regards to CEST, we have in the pack again. We've provided a guidance note which compares CEST against an independent, in this case, Waitman's review, because it is our belief that the CEST tool won't allow you or your organisation to demonstrate the reasonable care that, ironically, HMRC are looking to insist upon from April 2020. Talking about reasonable care, interestingly, the reasonable care clause, that was only inserted into the public sector changes at the last minute, and as we've probably all know, and Mark's pointed out there, it was largely ignored by everyone, and the public sector clients, they just adopted a blanket decision approach. That could be appealing for some people in the room. It would make it very, very easy to say, well, everyone's caught, but HMRC are pointing to the fact in their most recent consultation that won't be acceptable, and they're insisting that there'll be clear communication and reasoning throughout the supply chain. We obviously agree with this approach, and we believe that reasonable care can only be demonstrated by operating a transparent, inclusive and robust employment review process. We actually feel without it that there is some scope for PSCs to be able to directly challenge and appeal, obviously only the negative determinations. As mentioned, HMRC have outlined how they believe the determination process should be cascaded through the whole supply chain, and they've very kindly provided us with an example. It's quite small to read, and there is a smaller version in your pack, but you'll get a PDF copy of this as well. So, without going into too much detail, the black brackets that you can see, that illustrates the blanket approach that the public sector took on board, and the yellow arrows, they're indicating how HMRC believe determination and indeed reasonable care should work in the private sector. The proposed change is this green arrow here at the bottom, and that's the intimation that the determination is passed to the contractor from the client. And importantly, HMRC, as Mark said before, are also suggesting that a process should be put in place to handle any appeals or disputes regarding the decision. Again, this wasn't insisted upon in the public sector, and ironically, it could have perhaps helped them to manage that in a much better way. And I'd like to, just on this next slide, just to quickly look at the public sector rollout and identify some of the lessons that we can learn from that. So Mark pointed out before correctly that the public sector didn't get a lot of time. It was, I think, from the point where it was confirmed to it actually being enforced was around about 5 months. As the slide indicates, the many points that there was massive upheaval. Contractors leaving and putting pressure on clients to increase pay rates to cover their perceived income shortfalls. Even now, when we speak to contractors, if they're offered a public sector contract, they're looking for a much higher rate than what they would have had if they were working in the private sector. The blanket decision policy also led to a number of employment tribunals, a lot of them still to be confirmed. There has been a couple of high-profile ones, including one that involved a lady called Susan Winchester, who actually worked or provided her services, I should say, to HMRC. Now that was never finalised and it was settled out of court, and I think Mark and Pilly are going to give you a bit more detail on that. Now, again, HMRC, they viewed these changes as being a huge success, but they have chosen to ignore quite a lot of the facts, in our eyes anyway. They proliferated an increase in the use of non-compliant models. I was speaking to some people earlier about that. Things like employment benefit trusts, which, again, from a supply chain perspective, can create all sorts of issues, because you really need to know where the flow of money is going, and if it is going into one of these and you know about it, then that can go back up the chain, as we'll talk about. The other effect of those is that these loans are now being called in and by HMRC. I think contractors have until April this year to declare that they've been through one of those loans, and some of them are getting bills in excess of £100,000, which they obviously can't pay. I think we can use these experiences and the extra time that we've been given to ensure that these same mistakes aren't replicated. Now, I have touched upon costs there, but the one point to kind of really define is that if there is an inside IR35 determination, then and the contractor, importantly, wants to continue to use their PSC or the limited company, then it will be, and it was in the public sector, unlawful to deduct employer costs. So the employer costs themselves would need to be added on top of the agreed rate, and ultimately this could be passed on to the client. It is highly likely that you will be faced with some increased pay rates where you say to someone, you are caught. I think we can all appreciate that. So when you're looking at at these processes, you need to start thinking about who you really need to keep, who you could perhaps take on, and essentially who you might need to let go. Okay. Once again, HMRC, they have very kindly provided us with an example which shows how the liabilities can be transferred back up the supply chain and back to yourselves as clients. Now, I must point out that this is an edited version of the HMRC example, because in our eyes, the HMRC example, you generally couldn't understand it. There were far too many parties in the chain for it to actually be relevant to the real world. So what we've done is we've removed a number of parties to try and make it as understandable as possible. As you can see, and again, HMRC have indicated a breakdown of communication is the black cross on the screen there. And that's where the green arrows are showing that the liability can potentially go back. So if agency 1 don't tell agency 2, then that goes back to agency 1, and if agency 1 can't pay up, then that goes back to yourselves, basically. So it really is, well, for us, it's vital that you understand your supply chain, and it really highlights the importance of only working with trusted agencies like Mawson, who you can be confident that they're going to secure the supply chain communication process for you. Okay, and going back to my opening points, that there is obviously a lot to take on board and to consider, but we do feel that there is a way forward for you on this. Okay. So what you've all been waiting for, what is that? And how can we do that? So, Champion and Waitmans, we together have designed a process to assist end client organisations to make IR35 determinations. It's not 100 miles away from what we've been doing for the last 10 years with contractors working to yourselves. So it's something that we know quite well. What we're trying to do is to bring that into the 21st century. It will be a two-stage process, and it will help you to compliantly comply with HMRC's proposed requirements. The process will also assist you with your initial audits, and it really comes into its own when reviewing individual working practices and contractual terms of the contractor. Unlike ZEST, it will consider all of the key IR35 factors that we've outlined there, and if correctly implemented, the process will allow you to make accurate determinations and allowing you, importantly, to demonstrate reasonable care. So this is the process that we have put together, and as you can see, that there's 3 steps to that. The first step, and again I was speaking to a few earlier about this, is where you are looking to understand your populations. You know, where do you think that they sit? We would advise again you to refer to the checklist that's in your welcome pack. That provides a summary of the areas that you can consider. And potentially, like we have done, adopting a kind of a traffic light system, which you can then allot your contractors into the appropriate status. Making it easy, but I'll go through it. Red, inside scope, amber for unconfirmed, and green for outside scope. Essentially, I think this process, I know from speaking before, some people have already started this process, which is fantastic. If you haven't, then it's something that you really need to start working on as soon as possible. Once you've carried out that your own assessments, you can then move on to the next steps, which involves using Waitmans here and their expertise. From our work that we've done with some of Mawson's clients so far, we have found that the quickest way to understand the potential impact and the requirements of this is to actually complete the Waitmans assessment yourself, and complete that in how you believe it should be answered, or how the contractor, in your eyes, is providing the services to you. Then it doesn't have to be done, just to point out, on every single role. I think you're looking at a selection of roles that may be similar to others, and that's going to give you a good idea. It also, the process that, as you're going through it, and the information that you'll get fed back from Waitmans, that will help you to establish the areas that you need to consider before moving on to the next step. Again, the number of PSC contractors that you have is obviously going to determine how long that process is going to take, but we would kind of promote the fact that you need to get that done by early summer, so kind of June time. The last step, and this is when you've received and you've processed the feedback from Waitmans, is then to decide which contractors you feel will be in scope, okay, and also identifying those that you feel should be given the opportunity to move forward onto the next stage and have the full assessment. Again, to really get ahead of other people, if you've done that right by Q4, so September this year, that's going to give you a good start on your competitors, I think. There is, at this stage, just to point out, there is an argument to suggest that to promote real reasonable care, that you allow all of your contractors within reason to move on to the second stage, which I'll go through now as well. Okay, so this second stage is essentially where the contractor becomes involved. So if you bear in mind, you've got your populations, you decided which ones should go through to that process, or you've said, well, we think everyone's going to go through, and let's see what they come back with. It's their opportunity, that is the contractor's opportunity, to complete the assessment that you would have gone through, so the same questions, and then allowing them to express how they believe they are looked after by yourselves and how they provide their services to you. Once that assessment has been completed and submitted, then that goes to Waitmans and an employment law specialist, and someone who's going to look at all the relevant parts, not a binary computer piece of software that's going to print out a determination for you, basically. Waitmans will then compile a summary of their findings, which will then confirm whether they believe that the contractor is inside or outside, and that will probably be in every single case. They'll be able to give that determination. It's then over to you, however, to understand and to authorise that. So the Waitman's report will be made available to you, and you can authorise that if you think that you agree with what it's saying, or you can seek further clarification on the other points. Ultimately, what you need to get into a situation is, if either way you're providing determination, that you're able to say why you've got to that determination. Now, hopefully, we tried to make that quite clear, but if there are any questions on that, then we can obviously go through at the end of the session. I'm now going to pass you back to Mark and Pilly again. It's like the hokey cokey this. And they're going to give you an introduction into the software and how these tools are going to be used. And I think there's a short video as well that you can...
Well, let's see if it works. I always dread these things in presentations. But so what we've tried to do is bring this, as Chris says, into the 21st century, to make it at least a bit more user-friendly, and to do it very much through an online portal. We, nevertheless, and you heard what the Court of Appeal judge said in the judgment section that I read out. We haven't got some sort of computer apart from Pilly, of course, and her computer brain, but we haven't got a computer in the Waitman's office that's just sort of, in a binary way, just spitting out this in an artificial intelligence way. Because with the way that the test is at the moment, we don't believe, and we're not alone here, that you can do that. So there is, of course, going to be an employment law specialist that will need to assess this information. Right, I'm going to play this video. Let's see if it works. And the team put some music on as well. But this is what you will get on our portal. It's a question of filling in the details. Then, in as straightforward a way as we can, we will start to do an initial very simple test, because it might be that you obviously fall inside or outside of IR35. If it's unclear, which it will be unclear in a lot of cases, then we go into some more detail. And through that, wasn't that music lovely? Through that, although it's not a simple test, we're trying to make life as straightforward as we can for you. And to an extent as straightforward for us as we can as well, as we sort of capture and contain the information in that way. But it will still involve, of course, going through the multifactorial approach that Billy has talked about, and then providing an informed view back to you. But yes, that's what we have developed so far, and we're looking to continue to develop, and we're starting to work with clients including Champion. And it is useful. We did a pitch recently for some work with a large public sector organisation, and we were able to demonstrate that we have this, that public sector organisation can work with directly. So we are getting some real uses from it.